I think you would agree that these are uncertain times. In 1859, Charles Dickens wrote these words. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going directly to heaven. We were all going the other way. Now, I'm not going to name names, but you may come to some conclusions today. Those words from Charles Dickens described the mood and times leading up to the French Revolution, and they could have been published any time over the past 8 years since the crash of 2008, and they certainly could have been written and published at any time during the current election season. Would you not agree? Yes. Yes. The revolution that occurred in this country had two parts to it. One of them was the election of the first president of a minority background in this country that has triggered a lot of unrest, unease, commentary, and bad behavior in this country. President Obama was determined to help people to rise up above their circumstances. He was faced with a financial crisis, the likes of which we haven't seen in a long time, and I would say that he did his best to try to bring people to account for financial mismanagement and malfeasance, and to do whatever it took to reimagine and re-engineer this country's economy so that we could survive the collapse of internal systems that have helped to feed the collapse of international markets as well. Given how entwined multinational corporations, markets, banks, investments, borrowing and lending, real estate ownership, importing and exporting, and trade agreements have become, there are relatively few people in the developed world who have not and will not, if not now, then at some point in the not-too-distant future, be affected by the massive downturn in the global economy. What happened here has spread around the world. The scope of upheaval has been breathtaking. Everyone from the owners of local shops on the main streets of America to our own Unitarian Universalist Association, which cut its staff several years ago and is constantly revising everything it does, all of these are feeling the pinch. Retrenching is the order of the day, sometimes because funding has dried up, and with it so have budgets, and so have the numbers of customers who are spending money. We have felt some of this here at UUOCC. The budget is always being revised. There's always the question of, will there be enough for this, for that, and all the rest? These revisions accommodate our financially changed circumstances, and they may reflect our fear of things getting worse. Fear is a word we've been hearing a lot recently, but mostly from the media, and also from candidates running for office in this country, who tell us over and over again on television that people are afraid, that people are angry. I don't know about you, but I firmly believe that what you focus on increases. If you focus on being afraid, your fear levels increase. If you focus on being angry, your anger increases. You can obsess over both of those dimensions of behavior and feeling. We do have reason to be afraid. Pensions have disappeared. The worth of our homes has evaporated. College funds may have gone up in a puff of smoke. And some of us have faced the loss of jobs. What then? What then? It's the scale of this, the real issues that has bothered people, and it's the exaggerated scale of the fears and obsessions of people making other people feel afraid that is on top of all of this. We don't really know where we are on the roller coaster, but it is true that the economy in this country has settled down to a large extent from where it was in 2008, which isn't to say that everybody in this room is better off, but that a lot of the misery and the challenges have slowed down. We may still have a long way to go, or maybe not such a long way to go. We can't tell. Not knowing that also produces anxiety. And that may be why at any given moment in time, it helps to remember that nearly everyone is dealing with something difficult in life. Could be a personal problem, a family problem, an employment problem, a financial problem. Everyone has something to deal with. Is there anyone here who has never had to deal with a problem? Anyone? I rest my case. Every minute of every day, people are struggling to live, and if they're lucky enough to be affluent, they have been discovering that they will probably be living with less now. Like many people who have always had less, not just now, but always. It may not feel that way, but we are not our net worth. We are at the bottom of everything else, our self-worth. That may be difficult to remember when our heads are spinning about what's going on around us. Possibly the best news that came from the crash is that it has given us the opportunity to wake up and pay attention to the fact that the accumulation of debt is one of the factors underlying our current disorder. The best position to be in is that of having the lowest amount of debt. Abraham Lincoln, who was a very shrewd man, although not very well educated, is once supposed to have defined a balanced budget as one in which you do not spend more than you earn. Ever. I haven't managed that myself. Well, from time to time, yes, but we need to pay attention to our cravings. We live in a culture of addiction. We live in a world of the desire for more of this and more of that, more of the little, more of the large. We need to be especially careful with things that are supposed to be free of cost. We need to question our belief in eternal growth and prosperity. As one pundit put it, a financial bubble is always followed by the burst of the bubble. If you have read The Big Short or you've seen the film, you've learned how this works. If you haven't seen it or read the book, I recommend that you do. What we've been witnessing and struggling with is both a massive financial implosion and a sort of moral avalanche. You remember 2 weeks ago I quoted Cornel West talking about the fact that we were living in a time of mendacity, of public lying on small scale and large scale. It's part of the moral avalanche, the kind in which every snowflake pleads not guilty. Think about that, an avalanche. In an avalanche, every snowflake pleads not guilty. It wasn't me, it was that snowflake. It wasn't that snowflake, it was that snowflake. The run-up to this avalanche was years in the making, and its roots are deep, even as our social values have reshaped themselves with the more widespread affluence Americans have known since World War II. That said, in the land of the free to make money and to buy more and more, whether we really need it or not, there has long been tension between the ethic of unfettered individualism and concern for the greater good. You all know who Benjamin Franklin is, do you not? He's the man whose face is on the $100 bill, popularly known as the Benjamin. Nobody's laughing. There's a lot more to Benjamin Franklin than his face on the $100 bill. When he was alive, most people enjoyed the support of a communal social network. Individualism only extended to your individual job. But that work was almost invariably tied to the work of other people. Individual success was a rare thing. This is one of the most striking aspects of Franklin's life. He was a self-made man who began with almost nothing, and I mean almost nothing. His family was extremely poor. And he went on to great success in at least 3 different careers: as a printer, an inventor, a scientist, and then later as a diplomat who traveled back and forth to Europe. Instead of hoarding his riches and retiring to a life of mindless self-indulgence, which he could have done, he did as the Buddha did. He made it a point to live in community with others and to share what he had gained. In his case, wealth and originality. He was the brain behind Philadelphia's first fire department, its first public library, its first hospital, and he founded the University of Pennsylvania. Now that's a lot of social work, isn't it? On behalf of the community he lived in. He also served the first government of what became this country. All of this was for the greater good and the greater good of generations to come. In the intervening centuries since Benjamin Franklin lived, innumerable people have made fortunes here, and others have struggled just to keep their heads above water. Some of those who've prospered have become great philanthropists and helped others less fortunate. Others have kept their money to themselves. We know that many people view corporate types as the enemies of the common good. We know all about the extravagance of executives at companies like Tyco and Enron, and most recently we've learned all about the wealth and the bad behavior of executives at places like the Bank of America, AIG, Countrywide, those banks that came up with cheap mortgages for people who couldn't afford them and should never have been put into debt that way by the banks that gave them money. Then there's Bernie Madoff. I'm sure you remember Bernie. He ripped off everyone he knew. Family, friend, and foe, and stranger alike. Everyone was fair game for him. Now, why is it that people get so excited about money? In this country, there's a distinct culture of people worshiping people who make a lot of money. Do the initials DJT mean anything to you? Mr. Trump has made a lot of money. Not nearly as much as he says he's made, but he has made a lot of money. And why do people support him? There are a lot of different reasons. One of the most obvious is that he has achieved success in the eyes of many people. He has achieved the American dream. And if you are an aspirational voter, you are going to vote for someone who has something you like, something that looks good to you, something that you hope one day will trickle down and land in your hands. Right? Mr. Trump, however, is not known as a philanthropist. He is not known for supporting charities or giving money away. Despite claims of hiring thousands, as he puts it, thousands of immigrants and unemployed workers, I haven't seen any documentation that supports the claim. He is a man who has made money and has become a very successful figure. He knows how to promote himself and what he does. Now, there is tremendous temptation in the dog-eat-dog world of high finance for people to behave badly. It's a place where risk-taking is an addictive drug. Cornel West talked about that too, about the risk-taking. Still, within those ranks, there are not only rapacious people, but people of conscience, people who are often driven from their careers by their disgust with the lack of character shown by other people. People who just walk out of the corporate world because they can't take what they see going on around them. Didn't Cornel West say that the 11th commandment was one we should be aware of? The commandment, thou shalt not get caught? Fact checkers, looking into the statements of people running for office, specialize in looking to see what can be found out. They specialize in trying to discover the truth of what is being said. I went to a lecture at the Rubin Museum in New York several years ago, and there was a minister there who has both a law degree and an MBA from Cornell, and he pointed out that surveys show people in business schools tend to cheat a lot, and it wasn't until fairly recently, he noted, that ethics classes became part of the required curriculum for business schools. Isn't that amazing? No ethics classes. There were no boundaries around what was acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Now this leads me to asking the question, do ethics extend to political campaigning? Have you noticed ethical behavior and what's been said, in how the debates are going, in the media reports that you see, in the interviews with people? Do you say to yourself when you're watching them, wow, that guy's really got great ethics. He's got integrity. That is a person of integrity. Now this is a good question. You know, I posed this question seriously. Would you support someone who had no sense of integrity? You remember the questions Cornel West posed from W.E.B. Du Bois about decency, integrity, deceit, standing up to badness in public life? Well, there's that question. Do ethics extend to the political sphere? It's an important question to ask because a deeper experience of ethics, morality, and spirituality can help us see opportunity inside of crises. And they can help us in the current situation, in which so many people are outraged by things that have been said, by accusations. People are disgusted with the shouting and the name-calling and all the rest of it. And then we keep hearing that the candidates tell us that people are angry and afraid. This brings me to some other questions. And before I get to them, I want to say something here about the present situation in which we find ourselves. We may have lost a lot materially over the last 8 years. And if we have, we just have to let go of it. The Heart Sutra, a Buddhist prayer, tells us that what is gone is gone is gone. And that we need to let it go, let it go, let it go. I don't think the Buddhists saw the movie Frozen, but they have the same teaching, don't they? Let it go, let it go, let it go. And that is sometimes very hard for us because we are attached to outcomes, our desire for certain outcomes. Every crisis brings with it an opportunity, and crisis, the character for crisis in Chinese letters, means danger and opportunity. It's important to remember there is an opportunity in the midst of a crisis. This crisis that we're in right now in terms of what's going to happen in the leadership of this country brings with it a time for self-examination, for thinking not about what is gone, but about what we'd like to see more of in our lives. I, for one, would like to see more integrity in the public sphere. I would like to see more obvious demonstration of ethics in the public arena. From a spiritual standpoint, that is very, very important. Just as when there's a fire and we can only rescue a few precious photos or mementos, the bigger gift in all of this is that we can focus on living in our truth and in developing our own integrity. We can be compassionate with ourselves and others. We can forgive ourselves for the financial mistakes we have made. We can forgive ourselves sometimes for judging other people incorrectly. Because sooner or later, we all do this. We all make assumptions and we all make mistakes. The question is not will we make mistakes, but will we learn from them? And what will we do with what we learn? Our characters make even more things possible, things of greater meaning, such as our relationships with one another, such as community activism, such as bringing more peace, love, and justice into the world. I want you to think for a moment about this country and the myth that underlies a lot of what goes on here, that there is a separation of church and state here. That is completely untrue. When the Constitution was set up and the discussion came up about the separation of church and state, it didn't mean we're removing religion from our lives. It meant we are removing government support of a state church. This country does not have one religion, one denomination that is subscribed to by everyone, that is supported by the government financially. This is a country made up of immigrants who came from many different places, in particular from countries in Europe that were dominated by different kinds of churches. Reformed churches, Lutheran churches, Presbyterian churches, Puritans, Episcopalians, or many different lines of them. But they had enormous influence over the public policies in those countries. In this country, we moved away from that. People were running away from state churches when they came into this country. And yes, of course, many denominations once they got here were in some respects no better than what they had left before because they persecuted each other. Think of Massachusetts, where women were persecuted for being witches, where Baptists were driven out of the state, and Roger Williams went to Rhode Island to launch another place, where Quakers were persecuted and condemned. People ran all over the place. The Quakers came into this country and finally settled in western New Jersey and Pennsylvania, where they were free of that particular puritanical persecution, right? Baltimore and Maryland were Catholic. There were lots of little enclaves with different religions in them, but there was not one that dominated the rule of the country. That's where the separation of church and state exists. But take a look, for instance, at the money that you're carrying on you. What does it say on those dollar bills? Yes, in God we trust. And when you currently say the Pledge of Allegiance, what does it say? Yes, and it didn't say that until the 1950s, did it? When they would move to put God into the pledge. Can you think of some other situations in which religion is sprinkled around the public sphere?
Well, swearing on a Bible.
Yes, exactly. Swearing on a Bible in court. Now, what does that have to do with anything legal, really?
I guess it's just a symbol, but when you think also, on Antiques Roadshow, they had some astronaut collections, and I had forgotten that, I remember obviously that they read from Genesis when they were going around the moon on Christmas, where that went. But remember they put that on that stamp, you know, in the beginning, God, comma, and that's what Madeline Murray O'Hara used to.
Yes, yes. So there's the swearing on the Bible. I believe if you are a Muslim and you want to, you can use the Quran instead of the Bible.
You would affirm. There's not
exactly. You would affirm.
Right, Quakers just affirm too.
That's right.
Song God Bless America.
Yes, singing God Bless America. Lots of people really don't want to sing that song because God is not a big part of their lives, you know, and the supernatural God is meaningless to them. There are people who don't like those bumper stickers. And what about every time President Obama closes a speech, he says, God bless America. Have you not seen bumper stickers that say God bless the world as an attempt to correct that? I would say not God bless, I would say let us be blessings to the world. Let's leave God out of it. Let us be the blessings to the world. Aren't we the ones who have to bring more peace, love, and justice into the world? As the first Unitarian minister I ever met said to me, we're not waiting for God to do anything. are the hands that do the work of the world. We are the ones living in the here and now. We are the ones who have to bring about change. And yet, God is everywhere in some of these public places. What about all those displays, nativity displays, and displays of giant menorahs out in front of town halls, city halls? People get very worked up about those. And there was a discussion a while ago, maybe 2 years ago, about the 10 Commandments being posted in a courthouse in Alabama. Yes, exactly. Frank?
Philadelphia, too.
Philadelphia also, yes.
And Gandhi said, be the change.
Yes, Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. Yes. So we see that religion, despite us saying separation of church and state, religion seeps through many places where it really doesn't have a job to do. People have not let go of their old-time thoughts about that. There is, of course, the matter of what people do when they're afraid. And in this election, you think about the Supreme Court. Justice Scalia has just died. Justice Scalia was a very staunch Catholic. Right? He was an even stauncher conservative. And now there's a move afoot to make sure that whoever takes that seat is somewhere in the same niche for him. There's also the matter of the fact that political candidates court people of different religions. They openly and deliberately target people of different faith backgrounds. The evangelicals, that's probably the biggest, most famous niche. There's also, for instance, on the other side of this, Bernie Sanders, who is a secular Jew. And a friend of mine said, the problem with Bernie is probably not going to be that he's a Jew, although we've never had a Jewish president, not even come close, but that he's a socialist. Socialism, in some respects, is regarded as a religious niche, too, in this country. The demon socialists, the demon communists, right? We are demonizing things without thinking about what they really mean and what they offer to the public. So then there is the question of, what is it that people are afraid of right now? Many people are afraid of financial loss. Even more people, I would say, are afraid of the change in the culture here, in which white people become the minority. Ultimately, we will be the minority in this country. Something that I'm sure most Americans never thought would happen. Probably a thought that never crossed their minds. But it's coming, and it's going to change. And we're already seeing people fighting over that with the move to disenfranchise people of different backgrounds. As Cornel West called them, the chocolate side. Right? That's what he called them. Blocking voter registration, changing rules about identifications required, right? And then there's also the matter of those strange religions that chocolate people embrace. That's not said out loud, but that's another piece of it. The charismatics, the Pentecostals, all those people over there. Unitarian? Yes, we're another niche group. Definitely. It's important to remember, when we're talking about fear, that fear can be about what we might lose, and it might be about what we get. Sometimes in the getting of something, we're losing something. So there are two layers in there about the fear, and it's important to remember what that is. What is it that we're afraid of? If we remember that religion is a social construct, just like a political system is a social construct, they are both crafted to meet someone's or many someone's perceived needs for order. They're all about establishing order and a worldview in which people can live. And ultimately that means that they are about establishing power over others. I've talked in here about unhealthy religions that dominate their members, that persecute them, punish them, charge them with all sorts of things. And I've talked about healthier religions that do not do that allow people more freedom of expression as adults. Well, let us remember that for all those people we are told are so angry about the state of things in this country, that psychologists would tell you that anger is the upper layer, the most easily accessible layer of human emotion that often hides beneath it deep-seated fear. Fear and disappointment. The disappointment that comes when your hoped-for outcome is not met. There is, of course, such a thing as rational fear. And it's important in this election cycle that we're in, where all of these factors are being lifted up, that we remember to make distinctions between irrational fears of things that are very unlikely to happen and rational fears of things that could. And in the end, it's important to remember that it is irrational fear that can destroy us. When people live in times of fear, extreme fear, they behave irrationally. And most typically, they look for authority figures who will tell them what to do, who will convey to them a sense of, Father knows best. This is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it, even if Father knows nothing. Now, we're seeing this now with some of the bold statements that candidates make about things. And Donald Trump in particular reminds me of Silvio Berlusconi, the Italian leader who eventually was forced from office, who was a great showman, a very charismatic man, very bold and super masculine. Donald Trump channels a lot of that behavior and presentation. There is a difference between leadership that's based on experience and reason and real concern for other people, and that presented by charismatic people who are more concerned with the flourish, the display, and not with what goes on underneath. There's an article in last week's New Yorker that I highly recommend you read called Shut Up and Sit Down, all about leadership styles. All about leadership styles, and it doesn't mention Berlusconi, but it does mention several other people. And it's a really interesting inside look at why people respond in the midst of a feeling that there's a crisis at hand to different people. I just want to read you one line here from this. People who fetishize leadership sometimes find themselves longing for crisis. They yearn for emergency, dreaming of a doomsday to be narrowly averted. For leadership to exist, a leader must cross paths with a crisis. An exemplary person must meet her sinister mate. Without answering a crisis, a would-be leader remains just a promising custodian of potential. Before a leader can pull us out of despair, we have to fall into it. I encourage you, as you make decisions about what you're going to do in the coming elections, to go to reason, to choose reason over irrational fear, to vote out of faith in the possibility of other things happening, not out of the fear of what might happen. And I encourage you also to remember that this too shall pass. This crisis cycle that we're in is going to pass. It's not the first time we've been in a crisis cycle. It's not the first time this country has been in one. We've gone through this many, many, many times. So think on those things when it's time to vote, and to think about the structure of this country and how your faith moves into that, how your faith informs you as citizens. We are a denomination dedicated to social justice, conscious of our responsibilities to bringing more justice into the world. We can be better. We can do better. And I hope you will.